I thought it was interesting that Cameron's comments today saying that sort of the government is sort of edging in that direction, or words to that effect. And we're going to talk about this much more after 9 o'clock and get everyone's views on that then. But Annalise Dodds, what do you think about this? Is this a change of attitude by the British government?
I mean, I think it's unclear on the British government side whether it is a change of attitude or merely coming out of the particular way in which Lord Cameron expressed himself. I mean, certainly Labour's position on this has been very consistent. You know, we believe that ultimately, I mean, clearly we're in a dreadful situation currently in Gaza. We've called for, obviously, humanitarian truce that can then provide that space to achieve a sustainable ceasefire, obviously, to get the hostages freed, to get the much needed aid in to Gaza. But then we really do need to see a two-state solution. And ultimately that phrase has been bandied around by politicians often as a slogan, to be honest. We've not really been working towards it as hard as we should have been. There must be that diplomatic process. You know, we must achieve peace. And as Robbie said, that needs to be with a sovereign Palestine as well as a sovereign Israel, so that we can actually have security, finally, and what is ultimately the right of both Palestinians and Israelis as well.
But surely, given there isn't a Palestinian state, recognising one is just the equivalent of virtue signalling.
Well, what we need is what I've just set out. I mean, we need to deal with the immediate humanitarian catastrophe that exists in Gaza. But what is the point
of recognising a Palestinian state when it doesn't exist?
Well, we believe, and obviously we've talked about this quite a bit, both Keir Starmer and David Lammy have set this out at length. We believe that there has to be a peace process. And we as a country actually have a lot to give in this area, because we clearly, and there's so many differences, I'm not suggesting they're the same situation at all, but we have had experience of peace building in our country. We need to be applying that, ultimately, that experience and that determination right now. It's needed now more than ever. And I appreciate that to many people, the idea of a two-state solution now can seem extremely far away. Of course it can, when we've got such appalling scenes being beamed to us all the time from Gaza and previously from Israel as well. But we need to keep that light alive. You know, Keir Starmer's talked about keeping that light alive. We have to do that.
OK. So John Hayes has joined us. Welcome. Now, the question here, and I'll tell you what the question is, but go to the other two panellists so you can have a moment to catch your breath and think about it. It's from Robbie in Chelmsford. He says, if we want a two-state solution, surely we should acknowledge the existence and viability of a Palestinian state. Iain.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite nice to hear anyone talking about this seriously. And I say this as someone who doesn't like David Cameron, thought he was a dreadful Prime Minister. I think it's really impressive, the manner in which he spoke about it today, the strength of the language that he used, and the fact that he's showing direction on it. So we're trapped. We're trapped in this extraordinary situation. I mean, you hear the things that come from the Israeli government at the moment. You just think, like, this is just the most unbelievably despicable approach, which is essentially exactly the same as you would hear on Palestine marches, saying, you know, from the river to the sea. That is basically the rhetoric you're getting from Netanyahu. When you talk to predominantly left-wingers supporting Palestine, you get almost no recognition at all of why Jewish people might feel that they need a state, that they need somewhere to be safe, why they might not be safe in somewhere that was a one-state solution, why actually there's a moral obligation, a historic one and a present one, to make sure that Jewish people are safe. When the debate is that toxic on both sides, to actually see a British Foreign Secretary come out and speak quite clearly on this subject was very, very welcome indeed. He did very good work today.
Anita?
Yeah, I agree with that. And one thing that he said really struck me, which he said the last 30 years have been a failure. And I don't think he's wrong about that. And the one thing I would say in terms of the approach that the government has taken, from my perspective, it feels as though the government has rightly tried to, alongside the US, take Israel on somewhat of a journey, which is to say we're not going to start off by saying, but gosh, what about this two-state solution when you've just had this horrific attack happen? We're going to recognise the insecurity that you feel, and we're going to recognise the horrors that have been meted on the hostages, but take them along that journey towards. So what is an outcome? What is the route to victory? Because clearly we cannot, they're going to struggle to completely eradicate Hamas. They're going to struggle to find a way to govern Gaza in such a way, anyone to govern Gaza in such a way that it's safe. And I think that David Cameron has carefully chosen, I think, the moment to lean in and say, we need the international community, Europe, the US, and the countries in the region to work together and recognise that what we've done in the past just hasn't worked, and that we need to find a new way to build some kind of security and safety, and also obviously manage the terrorist threat that inevitably still exists. So I thought that it was somewhat of a risk from David Cameron's perspective, because the UK has, I think, rightly taken the approach of taking Israel, and by that I don't just mean Netanyahu, right? Israel's a big place with lots of different points of view, but a journey that needs to be taken on all sides towards some kind of solution, recognising that I think, October the 8th was not the day to have that conversation. Now feels like more of the time to have that conversation.
John Hayes.
I think two things. First of all, I don't entirely agree with David Cameron. I work for David Cameron in Downing Street, as you know, Ian, and we don't agree about everything. We didn't agree about anything then, by the way. But he certainly added immense weight to the government, partly because of his experience. He's an immensely experienced politician. He's been a world leader, and partly because of his seriousness. He takes these matters seriously and speaks seriously. So I think he's been a breath of fresh air, really, in terms of his role at the Foreign Office. The second thing I'd say is that I think most of the pundits are right to say that Britain has a key role to play here. So America, of course, is a huge voice, but we shouldn't underestimate Britain's influence. I'm in the unique position, perhaps I'm in a unique but unusual position, of having very close Arab friends and close Jewish friends, and I'm proud to say that, actually. And what they tell me is that Britain underestimates its role because of its history, its reputation, and the esteem which is held by a lot of people. And so we shouldn't underestimate the role we can play in getting a best outcome here. So I'm speaking as someone who recognises all that David Cameron is. As I say, sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't. And I think he stepped up to that role in an exemplary fashion. But
do you think he's right when he says that maybe Britain should look at recognising a Palestinian state?
Well, I think the two-state solution has been the government's position for a long while, and making that real is what that's about. Now, that's not without difficulties on both sides. There will be people on both sides of the argument who don't buy that argument. But the fact that the British Foreign Secretary has said it so emphatically is a very important element in that discussion.
And what do you think the reaction of the Israeli Prime Minister will be to this? Because I think he and Cameron have a little bit of history, don't they? I don't know if you came across that during your time when you were in Number 10 with him, but Cameron has never been an unalloyed fan of Netanyahu, it has to be said.
Well, I don't remember that relationship when I was in Number 10, since you ask. And you'll have to ask the Israeli Prime Minister. I'm sure you could get him on, actually, and what his reaction is.
I think not.
But what I'd certainly say is there are strident voices on both sides of this debate, and what we need is measured voices.
Are any of you optimistic that in the next 10 years there will have been any movement in this at all? I mean, we don't know how this current conflict is going to end, but it's quite difficult to see a path to a two-state solution, isn't it?
No, I'm not optimistic at all. But the thing is, no one can explain to me what the alternative is. Yeah. What is it? What is the one-state solution alternative? Or anything else?
I think it's the 1.5-state solution is what a lot of people in the Israeli government seem to be promoting. That, well, yes, if the Palestinians have a state, it'll only be half a state because they won't allow to be able to do this, that or the other.
And even that would be a generous appraisal when you think about really the reduction in the size of Palestine from the point of the formation of the State of Israel. At the point where Israel was formed, you could imagine a viable Palestinian state. From really the late 60s onwards, that became much, much harder to see on just a basic geographical sort of calculation. So, no, it is not easy. It does not look likely. It doesn't look probable. But if no one can explain to us what the other solution is, apart from what? The forced migration of people? Moral actions that are beyond our comprehension. If that is the only other alternative, then we have no option but to commit to that pathway.
I feel feel more optimistic, only because I think that before the 6th of October, and obviously we can talk about why we ended up where we ended up and why Hamas did what they did, and it's not clear to me they really had an end game with that anyway. We did see movement from other countries in the region, for instance, Saudi, and there is, as much as there is so much, so much history here, there is also a series of fairly pragmatic states in the region that want to move towards stability, growth, and prosperity. Now, I'm not saying that is easy, and I'm not saying there are not decades of enmities in between all the states there. And I'm not saying, for instance, the Houthis and Hezbollah and others do not have a specific interest in maintaining instability in the region. But I do think that there are signs that some people are tired. And I think that's the moment at which things start to change. And if we're talking about 10 years, yes, I think there is hope for a breakthrough.
I mean, I think it's also really important that we are absolutely clear that we will not accept those who are making the prospects for that outcome far harder to achieve. So where we've seen, for example, the expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank, the persecution of Palestinians in the West Bank, when we've seen that getting worse during this period and kind of extremist statements from some Israeli government ministers, I think it's really important that the UK is absolutely clear that we completely reject that. And, we were pleased when the Conservative government did accept some of what we were calling for there, because now should be a time when attempts to actively undermine progress here are very, very strongly rejected.